Hello, to Soka family, and welcome to another episode of Two Sisters of a Certain Age Conversations with a Therapist. I'm a doctor. I am your co host, Judy Grant, licensed marriage and family therapist.
And I'm your co host, Dr. Sophia Grant, board certified pediatrician and board certified child abuse pediatrician.
So, Candy, we have an amazing guest
Yep,
today,
we do.
a guest with a whole lot of longevity
Yep.
in regards to our relationships. But before we get to her, I just want to shout out Wise Paws. What is
Yeah.
Wise Paws, Candy?
It's I feel like it's a collective of women entering into the next phase of life, midlife, menopause, and it's an organization that supports women in that next step of their journey.
Right. So
And
yesterday, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, yesterday,
Yesterday, we had the opportunity to attend the Wise Paws conference. It was a
right,
day-long event at the beautiful Skirball Cultural
furball.
Center,
Uh-huh.
and we heard from doctors, stylists, nutritionists, personal trainers about how we can all better take care of ourselves and understand that process in this stage of life,
Right,
and really walk away with some really good interventions.
right. And we do have a special connection to that organization because my dear friend was the first speaker yesterday morning. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Suzanne Gilberg-Lenz, who I've been vetting her for about 40 years now. And we
So
met,
she's
and
passed.
she's passed. She's passed. So,
I finally
Suzanne,
made it.
you made the cut. You made the cut. But Suzanne is a very well recognized OB-GYN who practices in Beverly Hills. And last year she wrote a book. It's called Menopause Bootcamp. And she talks about this phase of life that we're in. I just finished reading the book yesterday. And I'd like to say that it's a very conversational book. Like you feel like you're talking to somebody, but you feel like that person knows a lot about what they're talking about. So it's not so conversational that you walk away with nothing, but it has a lot of information. And this is the type of book that you need to use it as a reference because it's so chock full of good information. And I'm just going to read what Rashida Jones said. I feel 1,000 times smarter after reading Menopause Bootcamp. This book is so rich with important information that I can return to it for years to come. And I really do agree with that statement. So, the book is about menopause, but what's interesting is I got a message from a woman I went to high school with, Natalie Bell. We all went to high school with her. And she said she would love to talk about menopause from the Ayurveda and yoga standpoint. And Suzanne just happens to be an expert in that area. So, Suzanne, can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, wow. Well, first of all, I'm so excited to be on the podcast with you two. It's really special because I've known you pretty much my whole life. So that's pretty awesome. Um, you know, my interest in menopause is something that's evolved over the course of my practice and my life because as I got older and my patients got older, I realized we were entering into this without a lot of information. There's a lot more backstory to it that I won't spend time on. But as you mentioned, I have studied Ayurveda and yoga extensively. I actually, after completing my OBGYN residency in 2000, I was really stressed out, honestly, and I was doing a little bit of yoga. I decided I wanted to learn how to meditate. I was a young mom. I had 2 toddlers. I was trying to start my practice. It was just craziness.
Yeah,
I'm sure you guys can relate.
yeah.
And really out of my own interest for my own sanity and mental health, I kind of started getting into this stuff, and I wound up getting introduced to Ayurveda. So for your listeners who don't know what that is, it's the ancient holistic traditional medical system of India. So it's similar to Chinese medicine in many ways, grew up probably around 6,000 years ago. Very similar approaches to life. And it's honestly leaked into the popular culture in a lot of ways without people really understanding that that's where it's coming from. But it is what we like to call the original lifestyle medicine. So in Ayurveda, we look at our unique individual differences. There isn't a prescriptive, like this is what you do. You need to have an understanding of who you are, and there's a paradigm basis in elements and things like that, that if you're that interested, we can send a link and you can read my book. I do talk about it. But it's also linked to the season, the locality, the season of your life. So the idea is that we have to constantly be checking in with ourselves and shifting with what is presented to us. That there is no perfect point of balance. If you think about a seesaw, the seesaw never is straight across. It's
Right.
constantly moving. This idea, I think, in Western culture, we're going to find we're going to optimize. And I mean, I do have optimize in the title of my book, but I think this idea that optimization is a state and you find it and then you're there, that's ridiculous. It doesn't reflect
Right.
reality. And Ayurveda talks a lot more about shifting and change. And that was what was interesting to me. What ended up happening is because I learned about yoga is actually part of Ayurveda, herbalism is part of Ayurveda, meditation is part of Ayurveda. I really did it for me, but it influenced my patients because I had a broader approach. And so when I started getting into my practice and having people come to me with problems that I didn't know about, this was another tool in my toolkit. And I ended up becoming known in the community as somebody who was actually just open-minded, really. It's not like I was treating people with Ayurveda. I don't have an Ayurvedic practice, and I wouldn't say that I do, but that larger, more universal mind, body, spirit approach has had a massive impact on my own life, and personally and professionally.
Well, it
So,
sounds like you've utilized it to inform your treatment with each of your clients, each of your
Yes.
patients.
Yes.
And I love the fact that it is so individualized because there is no one size fits all. I hate
Right.
those tags. I hate
But,
those tags because
yeah.
there's no possible way that what works for others is going to work for me.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, obviously there's certain things, and you both can appreciate, like, there's certain medicines there's an antibiotic that's the right for a certain infection. But,
right.
Sure.
in general, when you're talking about, again, and I think when you talk about menopause and physiologic changes to our body, it's really important because I'm not about pathologizing this. This is not a pathology. Midlife is just a blessing. You're
Right.
still alive.
Right.
And I think when we frame this as a disease, we're really making a big mistake. So Ayurvedic approaches are very, very helpful in this way because this is yet another transition that we get to navigate. So what are the tools that we can utilize to help us navigate this more smoothly and, in community with support, with practices that really are nourishing, which is a big issue in our culture in general. It's a big issue for women. It's a big issue for women at midlife because we tend to be sandwiched between, if we have kids and families, older parents or older relatives and young people trying to transition, or work and home. And like, I personally have seen this in myself and with my friends and with my patients, just feeling so overwhelmed and burnt out. And now you have all these like actual physiologic changes in your body that make it even harder to deal. And you don't have training, honestly, to take care of yourself. We never have been taught as women to center ourselves. So you just
Right.
like, what do you do?
Right. Right. I find it interesting that puberty is considered kind of a natural pathway. You go through puberty, you enter your reproductive years, and then menopause, which is a natural path, is somehow like disgusting and
Yeah, yeah,
nasty and unnatural, and we need to avoid it rather than embrace it. And
Right.
we've talked about this. Like, we really weren't taught much about menopause,
No.
and your period stops, you get hot flashes. That's what we were taught.
yeah.
But the other stuff we weren't taught, and I'm sure women come to you kind of confused at this phase and wanting to change it, correct it. treat it. What do you think is like one of the biggest frustrations of your patients when they come to you?
Well, exactly that. It's, I mean, it's multifactorial, but I think there's this dual kind of like grief. Oh my gosh, I'm losing who I am, who I was, who I want to be, who I think I'm supposed to be, and confusion and fear, like deep-seated panic
Right.
about like what am I supposed to do about this? I like don't even know how to feel better, let alone get through it. And it is a big problem because just like as a human being, and you know, we're all like in the healthcare profession, right? Like we really like have devoted ourselves to caring for other people. So it's really hard when you have empathy and compassion to see someone struggling like that. It just seems so unfair. Um, but the other thing is that you're also battling like these massive cultural forces that are misogyny, ageism, racism, like all this stuff like really comes to bear here because it's pretty crazy that as women, the story is we're not supposed to age. Like what?
Right.
That's insane. Like so the
Right.
alternative is what? Go away, die? Apparently that's
Right.
one of the narratives out there. And it's really shifting and it's shifting rapidly. I'm noticing right now, but those are big forces to battle within yourself and the outside world. And I think even if you are aware of this perspective and you share this perspective, it's so hard. And then think about the people who don't even understand how much these isms are coming to bear on their personal life. Like that is really painful. I got to tell you, so there's anxiety and panic is a big thing that starts to happen out of the blue for a lot of people. Judy, you've probably seen this in this stage of life. I personally experienced it. Some of it is definitely hormonal, but it's hard for me to believe that some of it's not, and that it's like I said, oh my God, what am I going to do? Who am I going to
Right.
be? Like I don't see how that doesn't affect us. No,
Right.
and that's not treated with Lexapro. You know?
Right. You know, there's such a stigma
Yeah,
around menopause,
yeah,
and you're not supposed to talk about it.
no,
And if you do talk about it, it's like whispered in corners.
yeah, yeah.
And as opposed to, you know, when our young girls are getting their period, that can be celebrated in a home,
Period
right?
parties. Yeah.
Right, a period party.
But you
And you
guys,
get
you know,
this
when
great
we were
little
that
package.
age, that wasn't the case. Like, so here's where I have hope. I mean, I don't know about in your family, but not in my family. And nobody was like, in my parents weren't like, you know, they were, I remember my mom was kind of excited. My dad was too, which was, ugh, so horrifying. I was like, ew.
Your
Because
physician
I remember
father.
getting, yes, I literally, I remember getting my period and just being like mortified and telling my mom, being like, don't tell dad. And of course, you know, she went and told my dad. And then my dad like said something, or, you know, Arnie, he can't. So, and I was just wanted to die. So the thing is that was my thing, but it was also like, it wasn't cool to have your period. Like, one of my most embarrassing medical school stories is that I was rounding. This is, I know, it's tangential, but
God. Yeah.
I was rounding. I was the only woman on the team. I think it was internal medicine, and like the attending asked for a pen, and I reached in my pocket to get a pen, and like a tampon had been unfurled and was like attached to attached to the pen, and I pulled it out, and like it was so awkward. 1995 or something at County Hospital. Not my finest moment, which is funny now. But the point is, like, things can change. My long-winded
Right.
point here is I think things can change. And I think when we have events like Wise Pause, when we have women like you know, talking about it, when we have me on the Drew Barrymore show talking about it, like, it's the tide is turning. I also think that our generation is just not about that. We're like, no, we're not going silently into
Right.
the sunset. Sorry, that's not how Gen X does things.
Right. Right.
You know,
So
Say
we're
that
not buying into it.
as you say that, I have to turn on my handheld fan that I got at Wise Pause yesterday because
I wish
I'm
mine. I
flashing as I
listen.
speak.
You saw that I had to like run downstairs and turn the AC on. It's doing nothing for me up here in this nook. Huh.
Oh my
yeah.
gosh. Good Lord.
So um, while we have you on the podcast, I want to talk about some common symptoms and just kind of throw out common treatments. Now, one thing that Suzanne is all about is individualize your care. Don't just listen and say, oh, I heard this on the podcast. But okay, so let's talk about dry vagina. Let's talk about you're sitting down and you feel like the walls are stuck together and you're like, what the hell is going on in my crotch?
Yeah, that's
So
so
hold
awful.
on, I have to share this because I don't know how many years ago Candy shared a joke with me. Like she pulls down her panty and there's sand in it.
Yeah, yeah. This is when I go on my menopausal comedy tour. Yeah. How dry is your vagina? Like it feels like cactus, feels like prickles. What's up with that?
Yeah. So, one of the consequences of declining estrogen in our body is that tissue changes. So the tissue literally remodels itself. And I mean, we know that in the skin that we can see externally, we lose collagen, we lose elastin. That's why we get wrinkles. That's why things sag. We lose plumpness because we have less blood flow. And in the vaginal mucosa, which actually is similar to the lining of your mouth, you lose tissue density, so it actually gets thinner. You have less blood flow, less collagen, less elastin, so you have less moisture in the area, and you have less like play, like it won't move as much as
Right.
we're not used to feeling our vagina like on a
Right.
regular basis.
Right.
Like when we're doing out and about doing things, we don't really want to feel that. And it literally when someone is that dry, and I do have patients, a lot of patients who experience that, the tissue is not gliding next to each
Right.
other as we move. It also affects your urinary tract. So people often think that they have bladder infections or UTIs, and they don't actually have an infection. They have irritation in the tissue because now the microbiome has changed in that area. So the normal appearing bacteria has shifted and changed. The pH has changed. The odor can change. And you actually are more susceptible to getting infections. But more often than not, it's just inflammation and irritation. So what can you do?
Yeah.
There are a lot of products out there on the market that are non-hormonal and hormonal that work great. The non-hormonal stuff you can get without a prescription. All things are not equal. Some things are better than others. And, I'll tell you, things with hyaluronic acid, which I'm sure most of you have seen for your skin on your face,
Yeah.
work really, really well. There are some suppositories and some serums and things like that can be very, very helpful just for like daily dryness. Be careful, the more stuff that's in it, scents, things like that, hygiene products, cleansing,
Yeah.
no, don't ever do that. Don't ever do
Right.
that. But the hyaluronic acid can be very helpful. I'm actually like, it's surprising to some people, but natural is not always better. So hyaluronic acid is something that occurs in your body, but it's being manufactured in a plant, right? Coconut oil and things like that for some people who aren't sensitive can be really great for just moisture. The thing with those oils is that they absorb really rapidly into the tissue. And so for skin, for lube, for sex, we're not talking that they're not good, okay? For this, it can be helpful. There were a lot of interesting products yesterday at WisePause, and there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in kind of like the cannabis field, where there's some interesting products because cannabis itself in its various forms, like the cannabinoids, so not necessarily THC, not psychoactive, but the cannabinoids in CBD are known to be anti-inflammatory. So those are really interesting to me. But the reality is that estrogen, vaginal estrogen, which is FDA approved, can bioidentical. You don't have to go get fancy, compounded, specialty made. Your doctor needs to prescribe it, and it comes in a lot of different formats: creams, suppositories, tablets, rings. Really are the most beneficial and very, very, very safe, despite what you may think. So honestly, vaginal estrogen or other, there's one product called prasterone, which is DHEA. It's a precursor hormone. We're not going to get in the weeds with that one. Really, really help. They really help. And there's absolutely no reason to not get help. There's a lot of data out there showing that women will wait a very long time, 5 to 10 years, to ask about things like sexual health, urinary symptoms, vaginal complaints. If you wait for your doctor to ask you, you may be waiting there forever. You've got to come in and advocate for yourself.
So, Suzanne, just to piggyback on that, with this change in tissue and this dryness, could that lead to painful intercourse?
Yes,
And then
absolutely.
how do women, treat that, because they still want to be intimate with their partner?
Right.
But I think this is a concern that women have, and that equates to low libido. And so there's just a ripple effect here, and I want to be able to help some people who might have these questions. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the vaginal estrogens and the vaginal hormones are bar none the most beneficial in that area. And I'm so glad you brought it up because this is an area that people get very frustrated in and get a lot of misinformation. So, first of all, let me just say if you decide to use vaginal hormones, you got to give it about 90 days to see the maximum benefit. And if you've waited for a very long time, this is not going to go away with one application or even in 90 days. If it's, you're just starting on your journey and you're not even done with your periods yet, it's going to probably work faster. If it's been 5 years, it's going to take a lot longer. So be patient. Make sure you're working with somebody who really is also patient and expert in this area. There are doctors that are sexual health experts and there are doctors that are not. So those are probably the most beneficial. That's where you may need to also use lube as well. So I will say that using lubrication with sex is something that I've noticed a lot of people feel bad about it, like it's some kind of a failure. And it's really like, I mean, I get it, but also you kind of have to move on
Right.
because you got to use what you got to use, and it's not some kind of a failure. And I think it starts getting into like more intimacy, vulnerability. Are you communicating if you have a partner with your partner about what's going on? Because if that person, if you're having penis and vagina sex and you can't talk to the penis owner about putting it in there, like, wow, we've got a much bigger problem. Really, because I'm, you end up becoming a relationship expert by default when you're a gynecologist if you're willing to talk about this stuff. I hear some interesting things, and so the lube plus vaginal estrogen, hyaluronic acid can be helpful again, things like that. Using the right lube, silicone-based lubes are the best because they stay slick, they don't absorb, they don't pull fluid out of the tissue, they don't put fluid into the tissue, which is going to increase friction, not decrease friction. And then there's also all these energy-based devices that we have, borrowed from the aesthetics community that cause micro injury to the vaginal tissue, and then the body's responses to regrow due to the inflammatory response. So you get that collagen, that elastin, which you need for stretch, and you get blood flow, get a change in the tissue, and some restoration. So things like radiofrequency, microneedling, which I know sounds horrible, we numb you up. Some of the lasers, these can be really helpful. They can be helpful for incontinence as well. I do want to caution people to work with a practitioner who's not an aesthetics person because aesthetics and sexual health are not the same. You really should be working with a gynecologist or a doctor who is trained in sexual health because they will understand the full complement of issues. And I think when we start looking at libido, Judy, libido is complicated for humans, specifically for human women. I have seen people have their libido treated, and I'm air quoting, right? Like they're getting testosterone and things like that, which is, not a one size fits all. But their vagina has not been examined. If you have a dry vagina or a relationship issue and you're getting testosterone for libido, tell me you didn't actually talk to that patient
Right.
because there's a much more 360 approach that needs to happen and people deserve it. And it's not just to like go in and get a pellet. I want to go into pellets, but I'll just say I'm not a fan. No, I don't think I know we don't have safety data. So you're horny as hell and your vagina hurts. Like, well, I'm sorry, what? What the?
Right.
And I've had that walk into my office, that exact
Wow.
scenario.
Wow. And
Yeah.
this kind of goes into some of the predatory
Oh,
practices
yes.
of women in menopause and going to these menopause experts who want to test your hormones, test, get everything in cash. And so you have to really discern
Yep.
when choosing who you go to for your menopausal
Yeah.
treatment and make sure it's not a predator.
But it's really hard because the
Yeah.
problem for people is like we started, talking about this. People don't even know what's going on in their own bodies, let alone what's out there. And the minute you talk about this, the minute somebody watches this, their algorithm, if it wasn't already full, it will be full. And it's very hard for people to tell who is out there for them and who
Right.
is out there for their cash.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what to say to people. Like, I feel like here I am saying stuff and I'm telling you I'm an expert. I'm not trying to I still take insurance. Trust me, much to my financial discredit. It's not making me money, guys, at
Right.
all, which is my problem, not yours. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying you need to go to somebody who's a martyr, but like if every time you walk in the door it's a big bill and they're asking you to keep coming back for
Yeah.
big
Mm-hmm.
bills, like
Mm-hmm.
that's a red flag.
Right.
Right.
Right. And the
Yeah.
doctors who sell the supplements in their office, that's kind of
Yeah.
cringy to me.
Yeah.
In reading the book, I learned that spicy foods can cause hot flashes and
Yeah.
caffeine can cause hot
Yeah.
flashes.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So
Hello,
like
Starbucks. What?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
And you know, frequently hot flashes, menopause, but so many things can cause the hot flashes. First of all, we have that kind of dysregulation that happens
Mm-hmm.
during this phase. But then even like if you exercise too close to bedtime, your 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 uh your temperature, your internal temperature is up. It affects your sleep and
Yeah.
so what the heck is it with the hot flashes? I know it's multifactorial,
Yeah.
dysregulation, drop in hormones, but why is that kind of like when you talk about menopause, so many women bond over
Yes.
those hot flashes?
Yes. Yes.
What
Yes.
is up
Yes.
with that?
Well, I mean, we're starting to understand it a little bit more. It has to, there's a part of your brain called the thermoregulatory center that, as you mentioned, gets dysregulated. Basically, the the narrow the normal range that the brain is reading gets inappropriately narrowed, and
Hmm.
things trigger it. And here's the thing: there are people who don't have this kind of intense problem with hot flashes. I mean, it's like 15% or less, but not everybody has the same response, and we just don't understand it well enough. We're starting to understand it a little bit better. With some of these newer meds, we know that they like have an impact directly on that, on some of the neurokinins and things like that, some of these brain chemistry molecules. But we don't like, what is the purpose of it? Who the hell knows? And why do you have so many more than I do? Also, who knows? That we do know that usually it'll be like a period of time in which it's intense, and it could be 2 to 10 years, by the way. But
Mm-hmm.
it'll
Mm-hmm.
start to slow down and go away for a large number of us. Something like 7% of us are still having occasional hot flashes in our 70s. I'm so sorry to tell you this. But
Yeah.
that's also not a lot of people. And having
Hmm.
them occasionally, I don't think anybody cares. Staying up all night or every single time you walk out the door, you're having one is obviously super disruptive. The
Yeah.
other thing that people need to know is that it's not just like a funny punchline,
Hmm.
but people who have more hot flashes have an increased risk for cardiovascular disease. It's like an early warning sign in some ways, and so it's important for women to be aware of that and make sure that again they're advocating for themselves, because heart disease is the number one killer of
Right.
women, and it presents very differently in women, and not the classic left-sided, shoulder,
Right.
neck, that thing.
Jaw.
And
Yeah.
right, it can be fatigue, GI symptoms, stuff like that. And I think the combination of not being aware of our cardiovascular health, not being aware that women's heart disease is different, and not being aware
Mm-hmm.
that hot flashes might actually be related, is a really big problem. So, you know, I'm like not answering the question totally, but I do want to use it to educate people so that they know that, look, you get to choose how you're going to deal with anything in your life. But if it's that bad, it may be something that really warrants your attention in a different
Hmm.
way.
Right.
You mentioned some. Well, listen, I'm taking notes this whole time because there's so much good stuff. So thank you for that. But you mentioned something that struck me and takes me back to my childhood, that hot flashes are not something that should be joked about. It's not a laughing matter for that woman going through it. please don't diminish me, don't dismiss me,
Right,
don't
right.
belittle me because I'm going through this. And I remember, and Candy can attest to this,
Yeah.
our father
The
used to
physician
joke, the physician
used to
used to
joke
joke with our mother about her
her
hot
hot
flashes.
flashes.
And
Yeah. It
it
was like
was this
it
thing
was like a punchline, and
every time.
right,
And
right.
and first of all, that was the only thing I learned about hot flashes as a child because of the joke my father would make.
Yeah.
But today, if my husband joked with me in any way, shape, or form
He'd file
about that,
papers. You'd leave him.
yes, tomorrow. And it's he recognizes, and I appreciate it, that it's distressing
Yeah, yeah,
when you're going through this.
yeah,
And he has his frustrations because I pull the covers on, I fling them off, I pull them, I fling them. I've got the fan 5 inches from my face. But it's just, to anyone out there that thinks it's funny, it's really not, because
Yeah.
when we're in it, we are suffering. I just want to say to anybody out there that thinks that this is amusing, please know it's not. The women around you are truly uncomfortable and in distress. And in addition to all of that, we think about it a great deal. Where am I
Yeah.
going to be when I have a flash?
yeah,
Do
yeah,
I need to
Yeah.
take a fan with me when I'm up at that podium, or when
Yeah.
I'm in personally, when I'm in class, or God forbid, I'm in with a client? I'm in with a client and I have a flash, and it takes me away from my ability to be
yeah,
present with my
yeah,
Yeah.
client,
yeah, yeah.
because now this heat is just all over me. So
Right.
it's not funny. It's not funny. Please don't joke about it.
Clearly, you're triggered.
I am triggered.
I mean, for me, it's easier because like this is what I do. So I realize how lucky I am in that. I mean, I'm literally the voice of menopause for a lot of people. So if I'm having a hot flash, you're going to hear about it in my office. But it's really, it can make you also feel less than in some way, because we know that
Right.
how it's viewed by other people, or what we've been
Right.
conditioned, like the way
Yes.
you were
It's the
raised and stuff.
misogyny. Like women
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
handle it, and
yeah. And I think if
yeah.
your choice is to like, I think the thing here is like, let the hot flasher make the choice about how they want to discuss it or not, because
Mhm.
it just everybody feels differently about it, and it is super uncomfortable. It's sort of um, like when I was breastfeeding and like I had to pump and I just couldn't. It was kind of like you couldn't think about anything else. Like your
Right.
brain, literally, or like when you have to pee. Like
Right.
any human
Mhm.
can, like if you have to pee really bad, like you literally cannot think of anything else. You cannot function.
Right.
So
Right.
I have a just a thought, wondering, and I know this to be true, but Suzanne, from your perspective, as a therapist, when anything is like affecting our physicality, like it can wear on our mental health.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
it can. You mentioned anxiety, depression. This could, knowing that you're going through menopause, I think affects women in so many ways. And one of those is like, I'm not a woman anymore. I'm no
Yeah.
longer able to bear children. And I
Yeah.
think that's a huge psychological shift for people, which could lead to second guessing and doubting and self-confidence and self-worth and value, and all of those horrible negative self-talk messages that we will feed ourselves.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like, what has your experience been with that?
It's all of that. I mean, it depends on the person. One of the things that I've personally experienced has been really great. Like my perspective on this has been confirmed. I don't know, confirmatory bias, right? But and it's interesting because somebody posted a quote from my book this weekend, and it was basically about that, like how we also get a choice to look at this as a transformation and leveling up, to be perfectly honest. But that has to, because that is not being acculturated, because
Mm-hmm.
we're not getting the message that menopause could be a positive experience, we don't necessarily feel that way. So there's all this discomfort physically, psychologically, everything else that's going on, that's like, organic, coming from inside of us, coming from chemical changes. There's the idea that and I talked about this yesterday in my talk, like we get really identified with our cycle, like whether we're having our cycle, how are we having our cycle? Are we avoiding our cycle? Are we trying to get pregnant? Are we trying to not get pregnant?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, like that's a massive, that's like a 30, 40-year span of time.
Yeah.
So of course, if you
So
feel like
true.
that's who you are, like as a
Yep.
woman, this is who I am. The culture is then telling you your whole thing here is to bear children and be sexy. Okay, it doesn't matter
Yep.
if you're like, you know, a person who chose to never have kids, you don't even have sex with men. Like, and that's why people like that don't feel like they're embraced or normal, because what's supposed to be normal is heterosexual, cis heterosexual behavior. So we're going to put that aside, even though that's a huge topic. Now you're not doing that anymore. So who are you? But the reality is that you are get to be who you are. You know, before you were menstruating, you were a full person as well. And think about like how interesting, curious, inquisitive, creative small children are. We all three of us have raised kids. I mean, think about that period of their life and as a parent, and you really, I think if you talk to new parents, one of the most universal experiences as a new parent is I get to see the world through their eyes again, and it is so beautiful and transformative. What can we please apply that to this part of our lives? Because that is, I'm telling you right now, that is what has happened to me. And I did not consider myself a really super hormonal person, which is amusing, because I certainly in my 30s, and it was probably early perimenopause, my PMS was off the chain to the point where my medical assistant told me later that she tracked my cycle because I was a crazy person. I was a nut. And you guys know me a long time. I'm like not that chill. I mean, I'm fun. I can be chill, but I'm a pretty intense person. So now, oh my God, it was both beautiful and embarrassing. So I was like, oh, thank you, Maria, for loving me that much, right? She literally tracked my freaking cycle because I was a bitch, okay? And I was like, whatever, a lot of shit was going on in my life. I'm going to tell you something. So my daughter Georgia's birthday is September 23rd. Weirdly enough, it's in my calendar. My last menstrual period was on her birthday last year. So I am getting really close to my menopause day. We're going to have a party, everybody. I am going to tell you, I feel like a different person. I'm like, whoa, cycling was not so much fun for me, it turns out. I am so much more steady. And you guys know what I've been through in the last year, right? A major breakup. My mom died not that long ago. I'm totally transforming my career. My youngest is moving out of the house. Like every single thing in my life is up in the air. I'm very blessed. I'm very blessed. I have every resource available. I have so much love. I have friends like you. I am awesome. I am better than awesome with all of this bullshit going on. And I swear to you, it's not just because I'm going to be 58 and I'm hitting my stride. I don't have my hormones to deal with. So I'm going to tell people, like, it's really not bad. It's kind of great.
Yeah.
You know, Candy and I have talked about this, like at our age, like I'm feeling good. I'm feeling confident. I love the work that I do. Yeah, I get these flashes and I'm a little imbalanced, but big picture is like I'm in the prime of my life.
Yeah.
You know?
It feels really good to be where we are.
Yeah.
And I want to bring this up, and it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it was in the book, and I think it's important. I think we need to talk about gut microbiome
Yes.
and the importance of your intestines. Like I remember in medical school when I learned about Peyer's patches, which helps create like immune response in your intestines. And people don't realize how important the gut microbiome is for your overall health. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yes, I would love to. First of all, going back to Ayurveda, one of the things that I love about ancient indigenous wisdom is wisdom. So in Ayurveda, what we are taught, and this is a system that was developed 6,000 years ago, before we had anatomy lessons and an understanding of the immune system in this modern conventional scientific way, or a way to measure bacteria, or any of that, right? They knew all health resides in the mind and the gut. The way I was trained in Ayurveda is that you do your assessment, it's individualized, and it's filtered through the paradigm. anytime you are preparing any kind of herbal, and the medicine is plant-based because all medicine comes from plants, even pharmaceutical, like 30% of pharma is from plants. Hello, what do people think? You always make a preparation for the gut and the mind, no matter what the complaint is. So what does that tell you? They got it because they understood what we consume, food, relationships, via all of your senses, media in this day and age, has an impact on who we are. It is literally making our bodies. We know that. What we consume is creating the cells of our bodies. The gut is where we're digesting. We are literally digesting. So Ayurveda tells us this. Now, modern science has caught up. It was really interesting because I reached out to Dr. Emran Mayer, who's probably the preeminent microbiome expert on the planet. He's at UCLA. He was really lovely. I interviewed him for the book because the thing that we know is that the gut microbiome has an impact for sure on hormone production. It has an impact on everything. It has, like you said, the major immune system actually is in your gut. Major part of your central nervous system, so serotonin, dopamine is being produced in your gut, not in your quote nervous system. It's really in your gut. So that's why you have a gut instinct, why you have a pit in the stomach, right? These things didn't come from nowhere. And I said, so how does this relate? He's like, we don't know. I was like, stop you. So it's still something we're looking at, but we do know if we go to the basics and we look at gut digestion and how we are feeding ourselves, everything else is coming from there. So it's common sense. I love conventional medicine. It is a miracle. You can have a car accident and live to see another day. However, it's funny to me and ridiculous at best that common sense flies out the window and you need 40 studies that go on for 17 million years and cost $1 billion in order to believe it. And we have colleagues in the conventional community that don't understand that they are colonial and white supremacist when they reject and disregard ancient wisdom because it's woo. Wow, that's really disrespectful. You just said that indigenous culture is meaningless, when in fact, you went over and turned it into something, used your words, took it and made it into your own, and now this is better. It's funny and it's gross.
Right. Or the fact, and you touch on this in the book, that it's called complementary medicine.
Right. What? Complementing what?
Right. As if, well, this Western medicine, and then this is kind of a nice little adjunct rather than equally important.
Yeah. I mean, whatever. You and I could do a whole podcast on that. It makes me, I'm getting mad now. So give me a hot flash.
with regard to the gut biome, that translates to eating stuff that's seasonal for the time you're in,
Yes.
locally and plant-based. That's one thing that was stressed in the book. Like Suzanne wasn't talking about, oh, you have to become a vegetarian, but incorporate more plants.
Yeah.
Eat for your body.
Yeah.
Avoid processed foods. And then another thing in the book that was mentioned a lot is exercise. And you have to do resistance training,
Strength training.
Yeah.
You really do. We really do, in order to keep our bones strong, in order to build that muscle and lean body mass. But joy, the thing is,
Yes.
you have to, if you don't like the movement, you're not going to do it. Do something that brings you joy. Do something that is enhancing your life, that you look forward to, and that makes you feel better. And it's not about, look, do I want to fit into some clothes that I don't fit into? Yeah. Really, I want to be healthy. I want to live so that I can, dance at my grandchildren's weddings should they decide to do that. You know what I'm saying? And that I'm not worried about walking in my neighborhood and tripping on the sidewalk and breaking a hip.
Right.
I want to just pause on this idea of exercise. Joyful movement. We heard about that yesterday. So what does bring you joy? Are you joyful on the treadmill? Or do you want to take a salsa dancing class?
Right.
So also exercise does not have to be, at the weight bench pumping iron.
Right.
It can be squats in your living room while you're watching Netflix. So we need to also rethink our idea
Yeah.
of what exercise should look like.
Yeah.
And this was something that was discussed yesterday and I so appreciated. But I also want to mention that I recognize when I was like working out all the time and I'm coming back and I'm getting on the scale and I'm like, shit, that number has not changed. I'm doing everything right and I'm expecting to see this change in my body. And then I realize, oh, but my body isn't the same now
Right.
Right.
the way it was 10 years ago. It's going to respond differently.
Right.
So I had to shift my mind. While I'd still love that number to drop, I have to shift my mind and recognize, okay, but internally I am healthier.
Right.
Right.
I might not see the number on the scale. I might not see it in my stomach, but internally I'm getting healthier. So
Right.
that's also something I think that we really need to normalize for people. It's not about the number on the scale. It's
Yeah.
Absolutely,
right.
absolutely. And you know, we were raised again in this sort of weight obsessed
Yeah.
culture and in like a very specific body type,
Mm-hmm.
which is so damaging. And you know, I've spent 50 plus years unwinding personally for myself. I think it really, not that it doesn't exist anymore, but I think some of the positive things about like the body positive and the sex positive movements that are out there, and frankly, you know, the community of people that are our kids age has had a really good influence on me and on people in general. But there's still a lot of norms around beauty, and I don't know, people have to do the work around that, and everybody gets to make their own choice. But for me personally, I just have had to let go of certain things because it's not healthy for my
Mm-hmm.
mental health,
Right.
Right.
you
Right.
know, and it's not healthy for your body. You know, we all know about skinny fat. Like skinny isn't healthy necessarily.
Right.
Right.
Right. And those last few pounds that you can't seem to lose, that your body's holding on, the reason it's happening, and I learned this in the book, is because your fat cells have estrogen, and estrogen is trying to keep your bones healthy.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
as
Yeah.
we age, our bones are less dense. And then our miraculous body says, well, let me hold on to these fat cells. And the estrogen in the fat is trying to keep our bones from breaking, which like I never knew.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I love that tidbit of information because our
Mm-hmm.
body's accommodating for the stage that we're at.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, there's some evolutionary biology evidence that shows that the little muffin top that we get, that's because our body's trying to make, you know, we convert estrogen and fat cells. And so our body's trying to hang on to that. Like it,
Hmm.
you know, it's actually trying to help us. It's not trying to hurt us. I mean, and I think
Right.
instead of being in this war with our body, maybe listen to our bodies more. Our bodies are actually trying to help us. Our bodies
Mm-hmm.
don't
Right.
care about what's in a, you know, online or in a magazine. That's
Hmm.
not, it's not a thing for them.
Yeah.
Right.
So, Suzanne, I just want to thank you for being so generous with your time, and just want to let our listeners know that we're going to be having a giveaway with this book. We have,
Signed copies.
yes, we
Signed
have
copies.
autographed copies of the book that we're going to be giving away that we'll put on our Instagram page, the details. But the one thing, well, there are many things I got from the book, but the one thing is build a community, build a community of support. We are better together, and cultures that respect the wisdom of the older women do better than those who do not.
Well said, Candy. Well said.
Agree,
Suzanne,
Marianne.
I honestly feel like we could continue this conversation.
Yeah.
I'm not ready to be done, quite
Uh,
honestly, but I think maybe we need to do a part two in a little bit, Candy. We'll
I'm
schedule
happy
that
to. I'm
uh-huh.
happy to.
because
I'd be honored.
this is such great information to share with the audience, um, and so very empowering to
Yeah,
know first, that we're not alone. And
exactly.
second, to know that our body is doing exactly what it should be
Like
doing
we're
because
normal.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we are normal. We are of a certain age, and
right.
in that age range, our bodies are doing exactly what it was meant to do. And it is a beautiful thing, though it can be frustrating and can be annoying. We're leveling up, like you said.
Exactly.
Let's
Exactly.
level up.
All right. Thank you
Absolutely.
so
Thanks,
much.
guys. So good to
All
see you.
right. Okay. Bye,
Love you
baby.
both.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this episode of Tusoka with Dr. Suzanne Gilberg-Lenz. If you are going through that change of life where your body's changing and you don't seem to recognize yourself, you have a little bit more muffin to your muffin top, and you're feeling warm, and you aren't really familiar with who you are or what your body has become, please know that it's perfectly normal and we can
We can
relate.
relate. Please join us at tusokapodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Any thoughts, suggestions, questions, please feel free to email us or join us on Instagram. As always, we thank you for being here with us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.